Go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music's free, virtual, and as we were just saying, very informal monthly lecture series called Conversations with Our Curator. I am Melissa Ziobro, the curator and a faculty member in the history department here at Monmouth University in beautiful West Long Branch, New Jersey. We're just a mile from the beach here. Tonight, we are chatting with Dewar MacLeod about his book, Making the Scene in the Garden State: Popular Music in New Jersey from Edison to Springsteen and Beyond, which the Journal of American Culture called an engrossing read for anyone interested in the development of popular media, popular music, and American society as a whole. So, how's that for a nice book blurb? Before we dive into our chat, though, I always have some housekeeping details, and I always apologize to our regulars who hear my announcements month after month, but we always have new people on the registration list, so I'm always excited to share a little bit about our work with them. If you are not super familiar with the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music at Monmouth University, as I said, we are here in central New Jersey, just a mile from the beach and up the road from famed Asbury Park. We preserve the legacy of Bruce Springsteen. We are his official repository, but we also celebrate the history of American music in all its diversity of artists and genres with our exhibits, programming, and publications. So, as a public historian, it's enormously exciting to me that we get to teach history through music, right? Because I think that's such an accessible and exciting way to engage folks with the past. So, anyway, we at the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music are currently in the midst of building a brand new 30,000 square foot facility on the campus of Monmouth. It's scheduled to open in the spring of 2026. It will feature a roughly 250 seat soundstage, exhibits, an archive for researchers, a gift shop, and more. So we can't wait to welcome you to that new facility next year, just in time for America's 250th birthday. So you can stay in touch with us and our work on our social media. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, you name it. And you can also visit our website, which is springsteenarchives.org. I would also note tonight's program is free, but you can always make a donation on our website because we are our own 501c3. So later, I will put the website link in the chat for you. Okay, so thank you for letting me introduce us a little bit. And now we can get back to tonight's program. So, again, Conversations with Our Curator is this free, informal series that features all of us in conversation with researchers and writers who are exploring new perspectives in American music history. I really wanted us, when I started this program, a little over a year ago with Dean Dave Golland as our first guest. When I started the program, I really wanted us to have some free programming, some virtual programming, so that people could join in from anywhere without any barriers. Sometimes the books that we discuss are about Bruce. Sometimes they're not, right? Because we are, after all, the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music. And that second piece is equally important, both to us and to Bruce himself. So, after some initial questions from me, we will then open it up to questions from the audience. I do like to keep these events snappy, so we will be keeping it to 1 hour. Okay. With that, then I will stop talking and we can finally dive in. Dewar, if you could start with just telling us a little bit about your professional background.
Sure. I went to grad school, the same place as David did. We found out and studied with some of the same people. CUNY Graduate Center when it was on 42nd Street in New York City, which was pretty cool and fun to go to school there in the 90s. Since then, well, since 2002, I've been at William Patterson University in Wayne, and I'm a professor of history there. And I've written a couple other books that David, you should put in your class as well. My first was called Kids. I'd hold it up, but the blurriness
It's
doesn't really,
blurry, I know.
you know. Kids of the Black Hole, punk rock in post-suburban California, which I claim to be the first book by a professional historian on punk rock. And if somebody wants to dispute that, let me know. I mean, there's plenty of other great books about punk, and I'm not saying was the
I
first to write
got
about it.
I got a Zoom.
What? I'll go ahead and get that muted. Give
Thank
us
you.
one sec.
And then last year so I came out with a book on the Who's Tommy called Tommy, Trauma, and Post-War Youth Culture, which was a lot of fun and interesting to write. And maybe not good for an American course, but anyway, and now I'm working on, I'm actually working on a book on Christmas movies. And then another book about post-war culture, the immediate post-World War II era, which might take me 100 years to actually write, but that's kind of my thing. Like I want to hit send the day before I die at 162 years old. So and so that keeps me busy, and yeah, so I can get back into this book a little bit, and I really thank you all for being here and really excited. And we had a lot of different stuff to cover, so I'm going to trust you, Melissa, to guide us. But this came to you, I don't know if you folks know Claudia Ocello, who's a brilliant historical educator, and she came to me with the idea, and we had talked about doing something together. And it just kind of one of those things, nothing happened. It's just, I guess, kind of nothing happened. And it was great, and it just didn't happen that way. So I just kind of picked it up and did it on my own. And my thinking was kind of twofold. One is that New Jersey. I wanted to call this book Beyond Bridge and Tunnel, and the reviewer for Rutgers, the same reviewer, just twice. He read it twice and both times blasted me, and I'm really grateful because I saw some faces light up, and you like that, but it doesn't really do justice to it. But that was the thinking at the beginning, right? There's more to New Jersey. It's not just the stop between Philadelphia and New York. And there's stuff going on. And my goal wasn't to say, look at how great New Jersey is. The secondary part of it was there are music scenes everywhere. And New Jersey's had a whole bunch that are really fascinating to me. And I picked a sampling. There's definitely a second volume worth writing. I'm not sure if I'm the guy to write it. I do collect things here and there, and I definitely think, oh, I wish I'd done this, or maybe I'll do that, because there's plenty of other stories. But so it's partly yes to put New Jersey on the map and say we're worth something here, but even more also like look at the cool stuff that's been going on, and that I conclude with the stuff that's going on, in my neighborhood, literally, that there's stuff that there's people making music and enjoying music. And I come to this idea of scenes, and that's why making the scene. Well, I think my friend Kevin, who's here, I think he came up with that, or maybe I did. Maybe I'll claim it as mine, but I think he gave it to me. And it's a great, I like it because of the pun and all of that, but it really is about how scenes are made. And I wanted to explore not just different scenes, but also different types of scenes, and kind of push the idea of scene, like how far can I push this? Is this a scene? And others might argue and say, that's not a scene. Why are you writing about that? So I like to play with that without getting too bogged down in that kind of, all of the stories are great. All of the chapters have really, fascinating stories in them. So Melissa, I'll let you guide us
I
here.
I can tell that you are so passionate about this and that you did reread the book today, as you noted, right?
I
um,
did.
I just make a quick comment on Bridge and Tunnel. It stuck out to me right away, and Arlen is saying it's a great title. Actually, Jim Cullen has a book, Bridge and Tunnel Boys, which is about Bruce and Billy Joel. So it's funny,
Yes,
how that
yes.
eventually happens. But let's get back to your book. It
Wait,
is,
wait. Can I say one thing
of
about
course.
that? And I may ruffle some feathers. I actually wanted to review that book, but I have such a distaste, I'll just put it mildly, for Billy Joel that I
Oh,
could not do it. I'm like this, I can't write for Jim Cullen is a great historian and a great
yeah,
writer. So I was really excited and then I couldn't like, oh, maybe I could just skip the Billy Joel stuff. And I was like, no, I can't do this justice. So that's where my prejudices come in. I know what others have.
yeah.
Let's that's a side issue. We'll talk about this afterwards.
Listen, I applaud you for recognizing that you were not the man for that particular job.
Nice.
So your book, you just said, oh, you could probably do a second volume already, if you had time. It's a rather slim book. And as I told you in advance, I mean that in the best possible way, right? Because it's not a daunting read, and yet you pack so much in. I mean, you've got 6 chapters here. And for those of you who haven't purchased the book yet, you're going to go out and purchase it as soon as we're done. If you haven't purchased it yet, we've got your introduction, and then Thomas Edison and the first recording studio, the Victor Talking Machine Company and the scene at home, jazz at the cliffside, the studios of Rudy Van Gelder, Transylvania Bandstand and Rockin' with the Cool Ghoul. Perhaps my favorite, I may be biased, but the Upstage Club in Asbury Park, and then drums along the Hudson, the Hoboken sound. So again, you pack so much in. How did you decide that that's what you were going to cover?
Great. I prefer to call it svelte rather than slim, but no body shaming for my books here. But yeah, it was the stuff that interested me. I'll start with that.
Okay.
And at one point, I was the first 2 chapters. I was so engrossed in the research for that, and the editor for this book is Peter Mikolas at Rutgers, who does amazing, great work. If you have a book, send it to him. But before him was Marley Wasserman, and she was the executive editor. And I wrote to her. I said, "Can I just do it about these 2 chapters?" And we already had a contract and stuff. She's like, "No, this is not what you know." And I understood, and that's fine. But so those just, Edison is a boyhood idol, but just he's fascinating, and the recording stuff is fascinating. Then the stuff down in Camden with Victor is also, there's just a lot of really interesting stories there. And then so all the others, kind of came to me. I came across them, like the Cool Ghoul, the Disco Teen TV show that was on a UHF station in the 60s. I'd never heard of it until I did. And so there's 2 things that I really thought about. Is I wanted to do different types of scenes, which would mean different types of evidence also, and the exploring, how do I get at these stories? So the Edison and Victor ones were much more archival, which was really enjoyable to me. The Disco Teen, I happened upon like a Yahoo group when it's still, those kinds of things still existed, where all of these people were, re-meeting each other and talking. And so I got this kind of insight filtered through their nostalgia, but I got to get a lot of different perspectives from that. I left out things like New Brunswick, somewhat to my regret, but there's people, Frank Bridges at Rutgers is doing some work on that, and I would love him to do a book, and others. I think there's definitely a book in there. I left out the City Gardens because I would have just stolen from the great book by Amy Yates, and I forget the other author, sorry about that, an oral history and a great documentary. And if you're interested in that, that's fascinating, and that would have been a great chapter, but I didn't feel like just cutting and pasting from their book and trimming it down. So those kinds of, I think the Capitol Theater is really ripe for a book. And that would take a lot of interviews. And I really hope somebody, and it's kind of on my list of, it's not at the top of my list of books to write, but there's just, that kind of scene of the people who went to the Capitol. And I see some people nodding who either went there or you just know, but that's a place where people went all, there's a show at the Capitol. We're going to go from all of that region, but it's also where tons of people ended up working over the years. And that kind of thing where people, and I thank you, John. The Kinks show, right? We all like. I actually never went there, but I heard a Grateful Dead tape, that from the Capitol '78 or whatever year it was, those kinds of things. So those are. So I chose not to do those. I don't have good excuses. I just I did the ones that I could do that seemed doable in a reasonable amount of time, and I love them all. I think they're all really. Really a lot of fun. And there's, as I say, there's plenty more to talk about and to dive into another day.
Well, let's dive into the chapters, though. I loved that you addressed the impact of recording technology in chapters 1 and 2. This is something we do in our Music America traveling exhibit, which is at the Grammy Museum in Mississippi right now. And I will soon be moving to the George H.W. Bush Library in College Station, Texas. But we'll do it in our new building as well. But in any event, in your chapter on Edison's phonograph, developed in 1877, you write that you look at the quote, social history of how the first place for music recording developed. So tell us a little bit more about how you approach it as a social history, the technology piece.
Yeah, great. I mean, I just found I was really interested in the people who did this. Like, and I love Edison, and I like him also because he's really it's the boyhood stuff, but the myth is so easy to puncture, and he's kind of a sometimes annoying or ridiculous. And I loved seeing this very human character who, as I remind readers, was actually deaf and but was a music producer. And so I was really captured by first the story is well known of the technology of the phonograph and even the business of it, but the experience of working there and of recording there. And if you go to the Edison Museum, you can see one of the rooms where they recorded, and I've had some great tours there, and well worth going there. And the Rangers often know a ton of stuff. But I came across a lot of stuff about what it was like to record there, what Edison was like as let's call him a producer. But there were no such things as producers. There weren't rules about how to do this, so they're making it all up as they go along. And so Edison would do things like put a grid on the floor, like every foot was a square, and he would have his people record each instrument on each square of because it's all done acoustically, of each square in the room. And he would do it for all the instruments. He built a 125-foot horn to funnel sound. Which apparently was not really successful because the physics of sound was apparently something that others would say he was not really well, he didn't get it. And it wasn't his bag. But so that was really interesting. And then, he had, first of all, really bad taste in music, like just old kind of sing-songy stuff from the 19th century. He was deaf. But he would sometimes literally put his teeth into the edge of the piano, and he had his own little ear horn, and it was amazing. He could hear even by being deaf. Listen to this exact, like if you hit a wrong note, he would catch people hitting wrong notes, and they'd be outraged, and then he'd play it back, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, I never miss a note. And how did you find that?" But it was all technical to him, so he hated tremolo, any vibrations. He hated the E string in particular. He wanted to get the scratching out of the violin sound, which is kind of what the violin does, So there's all these great stories. Rachmaninoff comes in to rehearse, to record, and And the guy who was there, wanted to tell him, but Edison was already there. Don't play this one. He plays something, and Edison stops and says, this is terrible. This is terrible. And you're a pounder. He says, you're a pounder on the piano. And then as he's walking out, he tells his assistant, he's got a big head. He says, it's just silly. So they had to wait till Edison was away to bring him back in, and record Rachmaninoff. And there's just a lot. So aside from Edison, it was crazy how they all had to line up in front of a cone, and they would get in their different spots. That's why his measuring was absolutely on target, and place themselves in the different places where he decided you could hear the most. And it was hot, and at first they're making one copy at a time. They don't even have then they can learn to duplicate one. So if you bought a cylinder, it would be an original recording, and then they learn to reproduce. And because of Edison being Edison, all through the business, he has the top technology. That's never in question. He's getting the best sound. But he also, because he's really I compare him to Henry Ford, where Henry Ford, we know as an inventor of modernity, but bypassed so quickly because, famously he said you can have, of his Model T, you can have any color you want so long as it's black. While meanwhile, GM is coming out with colors and styles and different models every year. And Edison's the same. His records were sold with the Edison label. And it's not really ego, maybe some, but it's like that's the label of quality. And so he didn't think like, why should we pay these singers? They're all the same. I have our opera, we have our various things, but it's what you're buying is Edison. And meanwhile, Victor, which we can slip over to my next chapter, is starting to sign people like Caruso. And Caruso is a personality and is a celebrity whose voice absolutely sounds amazing with the technology, but also becomes a brand, and others do as well. And so Edison goes out of business by the 1920s, and because doesn't understand the marketing of the business. So I'll just
You teed me up perfectly to go to chapter 2, right? So chapter 2, we're looking at the transition from Edison's wax cylinders into flat discs, and you talk about the incredibly diverse array of artists that make their way to Camden, New Jersey to record for the Victor Talking Machine Company. So tell us about some of these artists. Were these, big artists, as you were just saying, Crusoe?
Yeah, I mean, the Caruso is great, and then the other really cool one is Jimmy Rogers, and there's this guy Ralph Peer becomes kind of the first, what'd you call him, a producer, an A&R man kind of thing, who's going down and figuring out how to sign people up, and he gets these great deals where they get more money than they've ever made, but he really gets all the most of the money, and he's a pioneer on that. But he's the guy responsible for what they call the Big Bang of country music down, where you can go visit, and really great place to visit there. But then, so he discovers Jimmy Rogers, he discovers the Carter family famously. And then for the next ones, they bring them up to Camden. And what I was really interested in there was, while that's all fun and fascinating, I really wanted to look at this, continuing the notion of scene, that this is where the idea of having a scene, I call it the scene at home. The scene comes through our commercial culture, through the purchase of discs, because Victor has flat discs, and through the Victrola and the really beautiful cabinets that they create that fits nicely. It's not a technology thrust down in your parlor. It is this object of art that is almost replaces the hearth in some ways, right? Or certainly supplements, and where you can entertain, and you can have, you can show off your wealth by depending on which model that you have. So there's status to it, but also where you can listen alone and you can listen together with others. And you're all listening. This is the beginning of nationalization, really even internationalization of the people listening to the same stuff. This is before radio, although they continue when radio comes. Electric recording emerges in the mid-20s. And so most of us have so many of our scene experiences Some are going to the Capitol Theater in 1987 or see Journey in 1978, right? And some are listening to the first time you put the Journey album or the Kinks album, and so are many other young people, in 1967, let's say, putting the needle on the disc and then going out and then even, using the album, then getting later to separate the seeds and the stems on the weed and all that kind of stuff, and sharing this experience, but remotely. And even if you're all sitting down to listen to Dylan at the same time. And so this is the first place where we start to see the building of a consumer culture that I am stretching the notion of scene to argue that's what's happening here, because people are sharing the making and consuming of music and enjoyment of music, mediated through modern technology, the capitalism and the marketplace and all of that. And I haven't had anybody come to me and tell me that's too much. And maybe most of you don't really care about the notion of scene, but that was, to me, fun to think about it that way, because it gave me some insight into how the consumer experience of music and the sharing of music really shifts. It's not just technology. It's the relationships between people around music that I'm interested in.
Mm, I love it. Now, if we move on to chapter 3 on jazz in Hackensack and Englewood Cliffs, you note that, quote, the music world that developed in Rudy Van Gelder's studios was distinctive both for its sound and its ambiance. I have to confess, I myself did not know much about Van Gelder's world. Tell us.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, and speaking of jazz scenes, like Newark jazz has been written about, and
Yeah.
definitely, and that's part of why I didn't, but there's great stuff on the scene there. So this is another place where, this is a place where Rudy Van Gelder is an engineer, he opens his first studio in his parents' house in Hackensack. And there's something about this guy and the work that he does that leads people, both Blue Note and Prestige and others, but the two of the major jazz labels start bringing their recording artists out there. So it's kind of fun because they'll go out during the day and then they'll go into the city at night. So all of the great post-war jazz artists, not all, but most of them record there. Coltrane, Miles, so it starts in his um, parents' house, and they cut a little window through. And I have some great pictures by Monk, definitely Monk there. Yeah, there's a great Monk story. Um, and uh, so it's first his parents' house, and you can see the Venetian blinds separating this room from the living room, and the kitchen, and there's Clark Kenny Clark, the drummer, sitting there, and I have some great pictures by Francis Wolff. Michael Cascuna gave me permission to use, and they're just beautiful stuff. And he's probably the premier jazz photographer, and you capture what it's like to be in this little place. Just a couple, and then he moves to Englewood Cliffs and builds this beautiful kind of Frank Lloyd Wright inspired place. And even though the physical structure is so different, there's something going on in the sound there. Some of it's Rudy, who's just an unlikely guy, who's an optician, and he's got an obsession with microphones, and he won't let anybody touch his stuff. And you wouldn't think he doesn't come off as like a jazz dude, but they all love and respect him, and the sound is unparalleled. And that's how he gets people hear it. I can't hear it. I'm not astute enough audio lead to hear what's really going on the level that others do. Some of it's his microphones, as they say, but there's something going on there, and clearly he understands, and they respect, and he gets people to do great things. So I'll give you my Monk story. So I was in my band, The Volatiles, which is a greatest punk rock band in Montclair, New Jersey. And we were playing with another band that had John Caspi band, which had a member named Des Cadena, who I loved. He was the second third singer in Black Flag way back in the day, and then played guitar with them, and then with the Misfits. So, his own little legendary status, and we got to play with him, and that was really cool. So I'm sitting talking to him before the gig, and it turns out that his father was basically an A&R guy, for at that time, and he was there, and Monk was recording. And Rudy would keep the deck running. And this is days of tape when tape's not cheap, but it's not digital. Keep the deck running. And Monk bangs out this piece, and Ozzy Cadena says, "Hey Monk, what's the name of that piece?" And Monk says, "Well, where are we?" And he says, "Hackensack." And that's how the song Hackensack, which some of you may have heard, comes about. But others, there's a famous Christmas Eve session where he and Miles asks him to lay out. And there's various stories that none of them seem really true, but there's tension, not fist fights. And Miles said, look, he's 6'3". I would never fight Monk. And those are great. And then Coltrane's Love Supreme is recorded at the Englewood Cliffs studio, which still exists. And I don't know, one of my students from William Patterson, Lucy Yagazarian, who was a graduate of William Patterson, and I'm proud to say, started in our jazz program, but came over to the history program. I'm not saying just because of me, but I kind of think it really was just because of me. And she's a professional jazz singer, extraordinary jazz singer, and she's recorded there. So and I'm not sure who's running it and how it operates. But so again, it's like there's a scene in New York that we all know about, and there's lots of crazy, great stuff. And then they come out here, to Jersey, and they get into this house and then this other place, and they just record some of the most amazing stuff. And he's got them booked, like Blue Note Records has the Tuesday, Prestige has the Thursday, things like this. Like every week they're coming out. So lots of really, really fun stuff in that chapter too, and really cool to think of that scene in a different way.
I want to start a New Jersey music heritage trail, and I've got a flag, of course, the studio. Do you know if it's on the National Register by any chance?
I do not know,
I have
and
to
I
look into
don't think
that.
so, but
Okay,
I don't know. Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Okay, so let's move on then. I'm trying to control my follow-up questions, ladies and gentlemen, so I reserve time for you. So
Oh,
chapter 4, we get into the TV dance show Disco Teen. So tell us about that.
so just really cool. So it's UHF, which is a new thing, and they need programming. And basically, they start this station because one of the companies has the converter. Um, you youngins won't even know what I'm talking about, but there was VHF and then UHF, and it's down the dial. I grew up with it, but you couldn't really get much on it, and you never really bothered trying a whole lot. But occasionally you'd get maybe a Spanish language show, maybe professional wrestling, that kind of stuff. So there was plenty of space to put on stuff. And this guy, Zacherley, had been a TV horror movie host, like sometimes like Saturday afternoon or sometimes late at night, and he'd come out and kind of vampire, not black, gray face kind of thing, and do these schlocky things where he's playing like he would have Jello and it's a brain, and kids loved it. Little Steven is a huge fan, and has talked about him many, many times. And so he is a lovable character, and he later goes on to become a DJ on one of the kind of all night, late night, freeform FM radio DJs in the 70s. Sorry, I don't remember which one. And there's even, if you're a Dead fan, WPLJ. Thank you, Paul. Dick's Picks. That's at Central Park where he's introducing the Dead, and so he's a legend for that alone. But in this show, it's such a trip. I told you, I got to listen to, be on this Yahoo News group where they're sharing their stories and and I'm, historian, I'm skeptical of memories and stories. And so, but I get the flavor of it. And I find, and it's all stuff like which girl was the cutest that all the boys had a crush on and stuff like this. And where, they're coming from all these different places. A lot of them, it's in Newark, right above Symphony Hall, the Mosque Theater. And, so some are coming from the local high schools, but there's a couple, one coming from Staten Island, a couple from the Bronx and things like this. And they developed these relationships over basically 2.5 years, early 65 to mid 60. The Halloween 67 is is their last show. And they developed this, and there's a thriving New Jersey garage rock band scene going on that are playing local clubs. There's all these teenagers, and they can play live. And anybody with a record, they don't have the licensing rights to be able to actually play live, so they have to lip sync and stuff like that. So he's get some touring artists. Most famously, near the end, the Doors come through just after Light My Fire, and it seems clear to me from the accounts that Jim Morrison is stoned out of his mind, but he says something like, "This is the strangest show I've ever been on," and that's great. But like he doesn't understand, they don't understand him. Everybody's like kind of freaked out and stuff, and they're not yet, they're not that big. They're doing this kind of show, so they're not yet the Doors that we come to know. But there's all these teenage kids, and it's really, they're having a blast. And this is if you can imagine, if you were on Disco Teen, and especially if you're a regular, you'd be thinking about it today. And this is the stuff that scenes are really made of,
Mhm.
because they shared all these, and they're all at the right, and they're all dancing. Now, the sad part is they would re-record after they would record the Friday show, no, Friday show to air on Saturday, I think it was. And so once a week they'd record, and none of this was, and then they'd re-record over. So there's a couple clips on YouTube, and it's from really late, it's from the Halloween show. Because that's the last show. There's a few clips there, and everything's dressed up, and I think everybody kind of has a sense that this isn't the end. They're not certain, but they know that it's coming. But they did all the decorations. They graffitied Zach's car. And the cool thing about Zacherley, and I met him at a Comic-Con convention or something here in New Jersey some years back, and he was in his 90s. And he was still friends with a bunch of these kids into his 90s. He lived on Central Park West up in that neighborhood. They would still come visit. He used to drive them home. Like nowadays, nobody would allow this kind of stuff, And uh, just like with Edison, and even when we'll talk with Bruce, like my job as a historian is to look for the underside if there's another story, not to just believe all the stuff people love, and not to bash them, but just because, right? I can't and couldn't find a bad word. And as I say, the fact that he stayed friends with these people for the rest of his life and many of their lives is really, really fascinating. So boy, is it fun to tell a sweet story, that, it ends because of the Newark riots. So it's not all sweet, right? There had been, it was integrated after a fashion. And you can kind of see in the clips that, but when Newark explodes, all of a sudden all the kids' parents are like, no, you're not going to Newark. And that becomes, and you'll see the same in the next chapter with Asbury Park. A similar thing kind of happens. And so anyway, that's the sad demise. But again, Zacherley goes on to have a long and influential career elsewhere. So that was a lot of fun. And so you want to ask me a question? You want me to dive
You
in?
teed me up perfectly then for chapter 5, right? Which
Right.
is about the Upstage Club. Too few people know that this Upstage Club is actually far more important to Bruce in his formative years than the Stone Pony. By the time the Stone Pony opens in 1974, Bruce has 2 albums out, but it's
Yeah.
the Upstage where he really cuts his teeth and meets many of the future E Street Band members. So tell us a little bit about that chapter.
This is the best. I mean, I think
Oh, good.
Discotine
So
is.
I'm not just biased. You're also saying it's the best.
No, I just love, like, I love, you know, how does this happen when these people get together? And it does happen all over the place. Some of the people become famous or whatever. So I'm a true believer. I have two young adult kids, and I've always said, like, my daughter always wanted to be in New York. And I'm like, well, you can live in New York and like, but it ain't the way it was when I was there in the early 80s. And you don't have to. And you can she moved to Bloomfield, New Jersey, and found lots of other musicians and artists and creative people. And it's all the people can make it happen. Cheap rents help, and that'll be the last chapter when we get to Hoboken for its moment with cheap rents. But so some of it is, oh my God, you get this extremely talented person named Bruce Springsteen. Who knew? But even if he never showed up, this would be a chapter because the guy and the couple that started are hairdressers. They have a salon and they opened a coffee house up above. They call it the Green Mermaid, and it's kind of a coffee house. But by the late 60s, 60s, 67, 68, it's electric music is happening. And so they they create this space where there's a wall of speakers and a stage with drums and amps and everything, the speakers there. And you come in, you sign up, and the guy sends you on, here's your slot, and you're going to go up and jam. And this is after now, all these musicians were playing there's a whole circuit, they call it the circuit, in and around Asbury. So there's a lot of young people making music, some of them making a penny or two here, a 10 or a 20 or whatever, some of them, and they're all playing gigs, and then they come there after, and he actually closes down for like an hour and then reopens at like 1 in the morning. And they jam all night. And I love that he sends them up. This is your slot. It's not you and your buddies. Although very quickly, Vinny Lopez is the one who's like, he had seen Bruce. And so the stories of Bruce that I get are all the same. This guy walks in. First of all, it's kind of weird, but I never thought of this, but he's gorgeous, right? Like he's a beautiful young man with long hair and all of this. Like if you look at the cover, look at his bicep. I mean, I didn't choose that image and I never really, and he's a little older there, but he's a young hotshot and, he's got ego and he's got charisma, as we all know this now, right? He still has it all, whether you like him or not, right? And he gets up there, and what I found fun is that he's a guitarist. He's writing songs and he sings, but he's seeing Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix. Those are the cool guys. That's what he's going to be. And everybody wants to be those guys. They even say at the jam sessions, there's a couple of drummers. There's a handful of bass players. So the drummers get a lot of Bobby Williams and Vinny Lopez and there's a few people, they get to play a lot. But there's a million guitarists, and let's assume many of them are quite talented. Something different when Bruce gets up there. And look, I'd be happy to puncture the myth, why not? I got, stake in this as a historian. And literally, Margaret, who's the woman, the wife in charge, she comes down to the cafe down on the second floor, says, come up here, and you got to see this guy. And that's the story. And then Vinny's very quickly like, let's form a band. And that's when Child, and then Steel Mill, and then the Bruce Springsteen Band, and then Bruce Springsteen Street Band. And Southside Johnny has a great memory of like going, being a little annoyed at this guy's talent, and because he was the hot stuff, and he's still hot stuff, but he's not Bruce. And so that's it's really fun. But again, even if Bruce weren't there, I'd be writing this chapter because I love music, and barely, really don't even call myself a musician. But I bang on a guitar, good enough for punk rock. I'll just say that. Although even my drummer keeps trying to replace me as guitarist. That's how bad I am. But uh, I just love that this stuff happens, and it's happening everywhere.
I love that you pointed out that this would have been a chapter even if not for Bruce. And I would point out we have pieces of the Upstage Club wall in our collection. So though the Upstage Club is no longer there, we do have chunks of the Day Glow painted wall
Yeah,
in our
yeah,
collection, and everyone will be able to see that in our new facility when we open next
nice.
year. So,
Yeah.
one last chapter to discuss. Chapter 6 looks at the 80s and 90s music scene in Hoboken, which you call, quote, an unlikely spot for a musical renaissance. So, why is there a musical renaissance?
Right. So, I mean, look, New York City is hopping at this time, late 70s when this starts up. And even though there's a lot of burned out neighborhoods and cheap real estate in New York for the young and daring to move to New York, it's still more expensive than Hoboken, which has been left to die by the city elders and the owners. And they're doing the same thing in New York, but and how do scenes start? Well, it didn't have to happen there, but there's enough, not even that many young people there. And Jim Mastro, I think it was one who said, it was easier to tell my mom I live in Hoboken than in New York City, you know. And but there's just enough. And then this, Steve Fallon opens this bar called Maxwell's, and it was Maxwell's. It was Maxwell's after the Maxwell House Coffee, and it was one of those places where you come get a drink and after your shift knocks off at 4 a.m. or whatever. And then you've got some writers, Jim Tesla, it starts. And so you've got this, this little kernel of these people who are eager to make music, and who knew? And yeah, so it's kind of an accident. Again, cheap real estate is key, and livability for young people on, being able to eke out a living, which is almost nowhere anymore, but you could still do that. And, there's danger that comes with that. There might be crime. There certainly are, problems when the landlord won't fix the leaky faucet and all that kind of stuff, but young artists are willing to put up with that. And then some of it is like, just like Edison. Well, Edison was Edison. That's you can't discount. You can't. I mean, somebody would have invented what he invented, but Edison invented that stuff and combined a lot of inventions. And in Hoboken, I really think that Todd Abramson, Steve Fallon, and then Todd Abramson, who are still around, right? And Todd certainly is. And then the artists, and they just create something. It's really special. And again, like when I look at Rudy Van Gelder, I'm like, this guy created something special, and some of it's his genius, but there's something about the mood and the vibe that he created. And again, you hear the stories, and maybe some have bad Maxwell's experiences, some artists, but I couldn't find any. I mean, and it was basically you get a meal, treated with just a tiny little bit of respect. It turns out it's all it kind of really takes, and a tiny little sense of let's curate something. Like, it's not just book any band anytime, and it takes off, and it it lasts, and for decades. I moved to New York at 83. I didn't come out that much originally, because why would I? I was in New York, but there were bands. I saw great bands there and would come out. And then I moved to New Jersey, certainly went there. And then the Hoboken sound is also interesting, because there's so many places where you get this place that people are churning out music. And then the record execs, descend. Seattle with Nirvana is the sort of most famous. And they kind of try that, but it just doesn't really work. And none of these bands get really big. And in a certain sense, maybe that's not great for them, but it's kind of great for us in a sense, because it didn't destroy the scene. And then you have what's unique there too is there's several touring bands that call Maxwell's their home in a sense, like every time they come through, because they feel that connection. And it might be even more than several. So that's kind of fun. Like REM plays there early, Pylon, the Replacements, and Husker Du, Bob Mould moves to Hoboken, is as much for Maxwell's in that scene as anything else. And then I close with the great writer Melissa Pearson. The Place You Love Is Gone, and writing. She was around then, and just like that Hoboken, which is accessible and livable, and yeah, gritty and dirty, and has its flaws, but like as a young creative person, you're thrust into in all of these places every single night. Sometimes, like, there's brilliant stuff going on. And then, you go to Hoboken for SantaCon now, which is, I think I write about that in there. Like, that's my picture of drunken people dressed as Santa going bar hopping and just, man. And of course, those people in Jersey City is the kind of some of the stuff still, you have WFMU radio, Jim Test is still writing. A lot of these people, I fell in love with Karen Cool, the Karen Cool band. She came around in the late 80s and discovered her much later, and my band played with her multiple times. As good as anybody that I've ever seen in terms of talent and as a performer and songwriter, and still plays. So that kind of stuff, still goes on more than 50 years later, which is pretty wild. That's, and then I close with just I do a survey of my little neighborhood in Montclair and then West Orange and such, and the kids are still making stuff. There's a place called the Meat Locker. Don't go there, man. It is as scummy as any punk club you'd ever not want to go to. That's how awesome it is, and both my kids have gone through their phase of going there. There's Outpost in the Burbs, which is a different kind of things. There's house shows. So there are still people out there creating music and creating music scenes all over New Jersey, but also, really everywhere. That's all I got for now.
I am so jealous of your students because I would gladly sign up to listen to you twice a week for an entire semester. Thank you so, so much. And I think everybody now has homework. It's to go out and find the little hole in the wall music joint in their town, right? And go see a show for us and think of this book.
And if they don't have it, then move,
Yeah.
right? Get out of that town. If you
Or
can't
start
find it,
one.
then
I
go
don't
to
know.
place.
Start one.
Yeah, there you go.
All
There you
right,
go.
so let's open it up to questions. As always, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it in the chat. I'm trying to see if anyone's unmuted yet. I've got a great pupil here. I don't know if I'm supposed to say who it is or not, but we've got a regular attendee who's been emailing me the question in advance. Like, that level of dedication is impressive. And this person asked about the Spoon Girls of Asbury Park. If you could talk a little bit more about the Spoon Girls of Asbury
Oh,
Park.
oh, wow. God, I forgot. I was like, what are you talking about? It was just like these little scenes develop their little like signs that is an inner language, like all little teen groups do. And this was their rate. You might have to remind me. Into like there was their basically is he hot or not kind of thing.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
and in at the disco teen, they started flashing this. They said it was before the peace sign, and it was vaguely sexual or something. And the Spoon Girls, I think, was that too, right? Remind me. I was telling Melissa that I reread the book today, but I've uh um but
Well, we'll leave that teenage subculture
but it
for
is a
another.
feature of subcultures, right? Where
Yeah.
you get your
Yeah.
own insider language, and if you don't know that, yeah, that's a good one.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Arlen, I see that you've unmuted. Did you want to ask a question?
Oh, no, 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 I'm just listening in.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
I got,
Dean Dave, I see that you unmuted. Did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Melissa. And I'm driving into Bell Labs right now, which is a scene in and of itself to pick up my daughter for her from her SAT prep. But my question for Dewar is, can you tell us a little bit about your process, either the archival process, what the day-to-day is like over there, or the writing process when you sit down and you start tapping out the keys? What's going on there for you?
Oh my God, Dave, what really? You want to do this to me? Like well, I'll just tell you this. Uh, I actually have like tomorrow morning, I'm writing, and it's not like self-will, but I need habit. I need to do it every day. And so I go periods like when you're teaching, it's not easy to do. I've been traveling a little bit, so not really. I've done it the 5:30 a.m. Let me get up and bang out, just an hour and a half. And I'll tell you as a writer, this is my best writing tip. just write the worst thing that's ever written and just keep going. And I don't think I've ever written, I might have, but I give myself the freedom to do that because otherwise I can't write anything until it's perfect, and that means nothing. So that's my little tip. And then, and I would leave myself a prompt. I remember remember reading Hemingway saying like he stops in the middle of a sentence. And so I would put myself a prompt like the night before and then just start writing. And so I'm about to do that tomorrow on this book that I've been working on and really need to just, I have done tons of, researches. This is about movies, so I get to watch movies, and that's easy. Oh, I'm watching movies. I'm working for a living, but that's, that's mine. I don't know if that helps, and I don't know if anybody's really all that interested in that. And then the other part of the process is I did different styles of kind of archival versus using pre-existing interviews with interviews of my own and this kind of stuff. That's kind of fun too, the various different ways of gathering information. I see Timothy J. Smith.
That's me, also known as Timmy Smith, the drummer of your band, The Volatiles.
Wait, are you trying to replace Dewar on guitar?
Never, it is not false. Dewar, I know, is a historical guy. I believe he may have his facts wrong on this particular fact. But anyway, first of all, Dewar, thank you so much for tonight. This is so insightful. I love the book. I got it I read it over COVID and I loved it. And I'm always amazed by Dewar's analytical style. But just to kind of prove my Jersey cred here, born and raised, youngest of 7 in South Orange, New Jersey. First concert, Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, Seton Hall University with my older brother. But to that point about other scenes, when you're talking about UHF, I was wondering if, Dewar, in your research for this, was the Uncle Floyd show or U68, which were these weird kind of bastions of kind of indie artists where they would kind of go and kind of hide in this alternate universe. And they were both based in New Jersey. Like, Uncle Floyd show had, obviously the Ramones, they had Blue Oyster Cult. They even had Peter Tork, pre-Monkees reunion, swing through there. So I was just wondering if any of that was on the radar or if that was kind of...
Yeah, and 68 is UHF 68 is what Disco Teen was on.
Yes.
I of course I've heard of and know, and especially from my New Jersey friends about Uncle Floyd, didn't really fit what I was looking at. So I didn't look more deeply into that. And Peter Tork is interesting because I saw him once doing a sound check at Great Gildersleeves on the Bowery in like early 80s, looking
right. And he would play down the shore too. I mean, he was kind of like this free agent, but it is interesting how these kind of, bands down the shore and just would kind of make their way through. But Uncle Floyd was this kind of bastion, this place where these guys would go and hang.
Yeah, totally. And it definitely could be its own chapter. The other one, when you said the shore, like the Jersey Shore band scene, really, the cover band scene deserves its own. I had a student and who showed me pictures of his earlier career in that, and he had long hair, and he was a rock star, and he wasn't even in the Nerds, he was in one of these bands, and he's like, we made money and we did all the things rock stars do, from being the Jersey.
I mean, my older brothers worked as bartenders at DJs and Xanadu, and like all these bands would come through, and that was like, it was a very, and obviously Bruce would jump up and play at all these things too. So he was always around.
You remind me, Arlen, I'm going to come to you in a second, but I just remind me of my Bruce. Only time I ever saw Bruce, November 1978, Jadwin Gym at Princeton. And I was a little guy, and so I was standing on the chairs, and everybody's just jumping up, and I'm going out of my mind, right? And there's no way not to. And I remember stopping from jumping myself and just standing on the chair and feeling this rocking motion. And later on discovered this was a kind of legendary show because they broke the floor of Jadwin Gym and had to stop booking music acts because of that. And every bit was earned. Arlen.
Yeah. Dewar, Speaking of Bruce, do you
Yeah.
think his overwhelming success over the decades has hurt Jersey musicians as much as it might have helped? And I'm thinking specifically in 1978, Southside Johnny came out with Hearts of Stone, which I think was his greatest album, but it came out in the shadow of Darkness on the Edge of Town, and it never quite got over that hump. And I think only Bon Jovi has been able to escape from that shadow of Bruce Springsteen and be a success on his own. I don't think Southside Johnny ever achieved that level. In the end, Huey Lewis and the News ended up getting the mainstream success that I think should have gone to Southside Johnny. But I'm just wondering because the minute most people outside of New Jersey, the minute they hear New Jersey and music, they immediately think of Bruce Springsteen. So does that hurt as much as it helps?
I'm going to give another perspective. Southside Johnny might have had a much bigger career because of Bruce Springsteen. Look, the music history is filled with bands that didn't make it the way they should have, that you or I could say. I think of the band X out of the LA punk scene, and
Yeah.
just an extraordinary band that the industry was not ever able.
Look at the Ramones. They
The Ramones, like,
succeeded commercially.
right. So I'm agnostic on this. I'm not saying anything bad about him, right? But I bet you his name is on more people's minds, Southside Johnny, than it would be if it weren't for Bruce. And anybody who released an album at the same time as Darkness on the Edge of Town doesn't stand a chance, right?
Well,
And so yeah, I mean, it may be unfair. My gut is, yeah. I mean, I guess that's my thing about scenes. People are making great music. The marketplace is one place where sometimes the marketplace works and brings us great stuff. But there was a whole lot of bands that you or I could, we could argue over whether they deserve it, and the ones who deserve but didn't. I always, my story I tell in my punk book, like I saw the Ramones when I was 15, not, 77. It wasn't like the early period, but at the Whiskey A Go-Go. And then I saw Zeppelin, months later, and I'm in the third to last row, and I'm 100 miles away, and like it wasn't like the Ramones is like too much. I was like almost scared.
77 Led Zeppelin, Madison Square Garden.
No, at the Forum in LA.
Oh, okay.
My point is, I just have always like what that Ramones gig, being at the Whiskey A Go-Go, standing, literally leaning on the stage in front of Johnny Ramone,
Right.
was like, this is how I want to enjoy
Yeah.
music. And so I'd much rather go see a bunch of teenage kids right now doing something when I can do that than go to see almost anyone at these places. And yeah, that's just my thing. So for me, it was much more about that part of the experience. And there's great people doing great stuff everywhere, potentially.
Yeah.
I've broken my rule and we've gone a few minutes over, but bear with me. I'm having so much fun. There's a question from Barry Oldman in the chat. Barry's a great friend to the archives, and he's curious if in your work, Les Paul fits into any of the scenes anywhere.
I don't want to say no. I don't know it enough to the scene aspect. You want to tell me and convince me that it should be a chapter of my next book? I would love that. If he's part of a scene. I mean, obviously, I know he's a giant. I know that, his place in music history. I'd be interested, again, if I did another volume in where is he playing? Like, the Meadowbrook is a club. I don't know if he ever played the Meadowbrook, but he was around that era when people like Sinatra and Cedar Grove. And, so there's lots of different places. So that's my interest. And again, I don't know I have not heard much about him actually, what he's doing locally.
Right.
That's the best I can do on that one.
I think we're going to squish in one more, and this will be our last question. You're getting so much praise, so much kudos here in the chat. So thank you so much. And I think this is a great one to end on. What surprised you the most in your research?
Oh my God, that's the worst question.
No, come on, it's so broad. You
Who,
can answer it
who would
anyway.
ask such a question as that?
Listen, the Spoon Girls was very specific, and this one is very broad.
I know. God, I don't know if I can say surprised. I just was, every story was, I had constant surprises at the little discoveries. That's part of the real fun of being a historian. And that, I found these 6 stories that just kept revealing more new things that made me want to keep digging. And they're, all fascinating. I think they all work with my thing about scenes, and that intellectually excites me. But just discovering, the stuff about Bruce, and the stuff about Edison, and then, all of it. So my first book was about punk and the scene. It was really about situating the scene in the social and political landscape of Southern California. And so, I guess the bigger discovery was really looking at the richness of the ways that people engage with music. Something I've experienced in my own life as a fan, absolutely much more than a musician. And that people contribute from all sorts of different ways. There's the writers, there's the producers, the zines, photographers, and all of that. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that was the real fun of this project. Was each chapter was like, oh my God, this, finding lots of fun, cool, exciting stuff.
Awesome. Well, I think that is a perfect way to end this conversation.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Dewar, for being so generous with your time. Thank you, everybody, for coming and for your great contributions to this conversation. Remember, we want to keep in touch with you, so visit our website, springsteenarchives.org, regularly, and please connect with us on social media. Our next Conversations with our Curator is on April 9th, and it features John Massaro. We'll be talking about Shades of Springsteen. So I hope we see you all there. Dewar, any last words from you?
Oh, you got me. You wiped me all out, all of you. So thank you so much for showing up. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you,
Have a
Dewar.
safe night.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Melissa.